So there was an interesting question came up just before satsang, and that was in response to something that I said yesterday, which is the key aspect of the teaching, which is that our happiness is not to be found in the flow of life. Our happiness is not circumstantial, meaning our happiness doesn't come from whether life is pleasurable or painful, but rather human happiness has got to do with our attitude to the flow of life. So that's key. And then we look at it and we can see that our attitude to the flow of life can be one of two types of attitude. One attitude delivers uncomfortableness and unhappiness, and the other attitude is the absence of that uncomfortableness and unhappiness. The attitude that delivers uncomfortableness and unhappiness is the attitude of personal doership and attachment to outcome. We can see that for ourselves based on our own investigation. When unhappiness, uncomfortableness is present and awareness lands on it, and the working mind investigates what is at the root of this uncomfortableness, we'll find that the uncomfortableness is guilt, blame, pride, worry and anxiety, expectation and attachment to outcome. And the key for all of those forms of suffering, the linchpin, the ground on which that suffering arises, is this attitude of me being the doer and the other being the doer, and my happiness being determined by what happens in the flow of life. So the question was, are we in control of our attitude? Can we choose what attitude we have? And in some teachings, there is a concept that says, you're not in control of the circumstance in life, but you are in control of your attitude to the circumstance in life. So in A Course in Miracles, for example, one of the lessons is exactly this, more or less. I'm not sure if I've got the wording exactly right, but very much this point, that circumstance you can't control, but your attitude to circumstance is very different. So it suggests you are in control of it. Now the question is that true? And remember, all teachings are a set of concepts designed to undo an error that is in place. When there is attachment to outcomes, attachment to the flow of life, we can use the word involvement in the flow of life, different to participation in the flow of life. They mean different things. Involvement meaning psychological involvement in what is happening. When that's the case, our attitude and circumstance are so intertwined, involved, that there's no awareness of this distinction between the flow of life and one's attitude to the flow of life. There's no distinction because they're so intertwined. We can't recognize that there are two. And so a teaching that comes in and says, the flow of life you're not in control of, but your attitude you are. That teaching is there not because it's truth. A teaching is never truth. A teaching is trying to bring about a change. And in saying that, it in putting forward that concept, a teaching is bringing into view the fact that there's these two, flow of life and circumstance, and my attitude. So it's by just saying what it says, it creates the potential for these two to be seen. And for a while, it seems like I am the one in control of my attitude. So the teaching says, yes, for a while I'll let you think you're in control of your attitude. That's how life unfolds, as if you're in control of your attitude. It's good enough that you've now seen that there is the flow of life and your attitude to it. Further on in the Course of Miracles, it says another lesson. It says, oh, by the way, did I forget to tell you that even your attitude is not something you're in control of? So we can see with this example, it's a great example that a teaching is not the truth. No teaching is the truth. Nothing that any teacher has ever uttered, any teacher has ever said or written down, is not the truth. No teacher has ever uttered a word of truth. All teachings are concepts designed to bring about change. And so we can see that in the one teaching it says one thing, and then it says, oh, actually, that wasn't quite right. But if it really wasn't quite right, they'd just delete it out of the teaching and fix it. But actually, it's perfect the way it is. It's meant to be like that. So this is a great example of showing us, a teaching is just doing a job. Further on, it could even say something different again. It doesn't say anything different again in relation to attitude. That's it. And so here it's being made clear. Your attitude is not even your attitude. Why is this the case? We need to be able to investigate it and see intellectually, understand intellectually, so that then that intellectual understanding goes deeper and deeper until it's known. When we look at the attitude of doership and attachment to outcome, that attitude is specifically based on a deeply ingrained set of beliefs. The attitude is not something you choose, but it's forced, it's a movement. What we call this attitude is a movement of mind, of thinking, based on some ingrained beliefs. So the ingrained belief is, I believe that I am the doer and the other is the doer. And I believe that my happiness is to be found in outcomes. And therefore, when life unfolds, which really is a happening, there is no doer doing anything. Life is just unfolding mechanically. When life unfolds, and what unfolds mechanically is painful, based on my genes and up-to-date conditioning, that belief system that is part of my genes and up-to-date conditioning also is forced to explode into action, because the flow of life has bumped into it. And as a result of that, there is a reaction. And the reaction is blame or guilt. So that reaction can be seen to be our attitude to what is happening in the flow of life, our attitude towards ourself and the other that is contributing to what is happening in the flow of life. And so we can see that the attitude in that moment is not something I choose, but something that is destined and forced to happen based on my makeup or the person's makeup at that point in time. So if the deeply ingrained belief of doership and attachment to outcome has been inserted as part of our up-to-date conditioning by life as it's unfolded moment after moment up to a particular point in time, then the attitude that comes out is a happening, not my doing. In the same way as whatever happens on a biological level is based on one's genes and up-to-date conditioning. And so what happens on a biological level is also a happening, not anyone's doing. It's mechanical on a biological and psychological level. That movement is mechanical, both the psychological and the biological. The new attitude of what we can call non-doership and non-attachment to outcome, when we look at it closely, is actually just the absence of the old attitude. It isn't a new belief system that then functions in the same way as the old attitude, which is a series of thoughts and movements in the brain, producing a mental attitude. The new attitude, we can say, is the attitude of the heart, which is simply the absence of the old attitude which got in the way of our true nature. So the attitude of non-doership is not really an attitude. Well, it is an attitude because when we look at how the human being functions and what the psychological relationship to life is, we could say, well, when I see my response or reaction to life, I can say that my non-response to pain in the moment, well, there's response on a biological level, but my non-response on the level of the psychological reaction, I could say, we can call that, is I have an attitude of non-doership, because I'm not blaming the other, I'm not blaming myself. But technically, it's the absence of the deeply ingrained belief that I am the doer and my happiness is to be found in outcomes. And so the new attitude, also not my doing, because the new attitude will be there when life dissolves the beliefs. And we don't dissolve the beliefs. The doer doesn't say, okay, now it's time for me to let go of this belief. The beliefs get let go of because life delivers new conditioning, the new set of thinking happens, which is more conditioning. Once a thought arises and a conclusion arises or an insight arises, that's new conditioning again. So life will deliver conditioning in the form of this talk, let's say, or in the form of information in certain books. And then thinking happens in line with the body's up-to-date conditioning, which includes the information in the talk or the book. Thinking happens and conclusions happen. And when a conclusion happens, that's in itself new conditioning that updates the up-to-date conditioning in the body. And eventually, certain beliefs that used to be assumed to be true are seen to be based on false premise. Once they're understood to be based on false premise, they fall away. And that falling away of the belief is life bringing about that change as a result of what life delivered and as a result of all the thinking which just happened based on everything that came before. So then we can say, wow, my attitude, whether it's an attitude of suffering or an attitude of the heart, which brings about peace of mind regardless of circumstance, both of those are a happening and not my doing, which means no capacity to feel proud if life brings about this change. The realization is there is no one that made this happen. This is all part of the story of life. So pride falls away. And if the understanding starts going deeper, when suffering arises, it'll be understood this is a happening, not my doing. Suffering is arising based on the deeply ingrained beliefs of doership and attachment to outcome that I didn't put in place. So suffering is happening. It's destined to happen. Let it be. Let it happen. And there will be a witnessing of the suffering as a happening and no guilt, which would be based on the belief, I am the doer of this suffering. No guilt arising, and the suffering is allowed to be there. Now, obviously, because the suffering is there, there is still on some level of the body the belief in personal doership. But to the extent that the intellectual understanding has penetrated down, and to the extent that the suffering is able to be witnessed as a happening, we can clearly see that on the outer levels, the belief in personal doership is being dissolved. Dissolved to an extent that the suffering which is happening can be witnessed as a happening. What I mean by the suffering that's happening is we can call that the primary suffering. And if we look at it, let's say it's guilt or blame about something that had happened. So let's say we're blaming a sibling of ours for something they did in the past. At the root of that suffering, there is still the belief in personal doership. That's why the blame is arising. But then the understanding on the outer level understands even that blame, which is taking my sibling to be the doer. The blame is a happening, and so I'm just going to witness it, not get involved with the blame. And that means the primary suffering remains as primary suffering. If the understanding on the outer level wasn't there, what would happen is we would blame our sibling, and then, understanding that blame is a form of suffering, we might feel guilty for blaming. So then we have the primary suffering and secondary suffering on top of the primary suffering. To the extent that we don't feel guilty for blaming, even understanding that blame is a form of suffering and what we're really looking for is the end of suffering. To the extent we don't feel guilty that blame is happening, it's a really encouraging sign. It's a sign that the understanding of non-doership has gone deep into the body to the extent that even suffering can be witnessed. The understanding always starts on the outer level. So if the blame is witnessed, it means the understanding is there on a significant level, and it makes sense that it's now going to move further and further into the center. So once that understanding that has started to happen in relation to the primary suffering goes deeper and deeper, we find that the primary suffering gets cut off quicker and quicker, and eventually even the primary suffering stops arising. So this is why in a lot of teachings, and in this teaching as well, we're encouraged to allow everything to be as it is, even suffering when it arises. To the extent we find ourselves witnessing suffering, not getting involved in suffering, we can say there is much more peace than when there is full involvement in the suffering. But to say that that is enlightenment, to me, is a little bit of a stretch. Enlightenment in its stabilized form is where no suffering arises because the belief in personal doership and attachment has been completely annihilated from within all hiding places in the body and mind. Now, this shouldn't be set up as a goal. If we set it up as a goal, then once again, we're not going to be able to witness suffering. We're going to resist it and say, it shouldn't be here. This is disturbing my goal. My goal is the end of suffering, and this suffering is arising, it's disturbing my goal. And so then we will resist the suffering that arises. So the point of describing enlightenment as the end of suffering is not to give it to the doer as a prescription. If the doer takes it on as a prescription and says, I have to make this happen, then what's likely to happen is that there's going to be more suffering there. But if the working mind, as opposed to the thinking mind, which is the doer aspect, if the working mind can hear this, can use it as a description, a very useful description, because what it highlights is that suffering, when it arises, is the problem. Not a problem that I'm causing, but a problem that is there as part of life. And it will allow an investigation into the suffering. It will allow our attention to be focused and allow us to ask the question, so what is at the root of this suffering, and come to understand the suffering. So to the extent that we don't have a clear description of what enlightenment is, we may find ourselves spending years hoping and waiting for something that maybe isn't available. We might spend years cultivating a certain skill because we believe that that skill and what it delivers is enlightenment. And when I practice and become accomplished enough, then enlightenment will be there on a continuous basis. But this enlightenment that we have in mind might be not what enlightenment really is. So the description here, enlightenment is the end of suffering, is there to allow us to keep that in mind. It links very much in with the question I suggested we need to keep asking ourselves, what is it that I'm really looking for? The answer being, I'm looking for happiness, but unlike what I believed for most of my life, happiness turns out not to be found in outcomes, but rather happiness is my attitude to the flow of life. An attitude that can deliver continuous unbroken peace of mind. Continuous unbroken peace of mind is just the end of suffering. So that's why it's put forward, so that we don't end up spending years seeking a full body orgasms or certain states of meditation or even oneness experiences or purification of the body such that we become a perfect human being, special powers, the capacity to manifest things, the capacity to heal the body so that sickness never happens. These are all very common ideas about what enlightenment is. And I would be quite comfortable, based on my experience, saying that they're actually a little bit off track. Some of them very off track. And so, hence, this teaching makes it front and foremost to make the point that enlightenment is something very simple. Simple doesn't mean easy, doesn't mean that we can make it happen. But when it does happen, what we see that's happened is something very simple. It's simply the attitude of doership having fallen away. The attitude of attachment to outcome having fallen away. And now we can focus all our awareness, which, once again, not something I'm doing, but a happening because life has conditioned us a certain way. Our awareness can land on what is most important to see. The false dynamics at the root of suffering. The error at the base of suffering. So if we're not the one that is in control of our attitude, what's the point of all these talks? What is the point of saying that enlightenment is the end of suffering? What's the point of pointing out that suffering is based on a certain attitude, the attitude of non-doership, the falling away of the attitude of doership? The point is that these talks are simply new conditioning, not new conditioning by Roger the doer, but rather new conditioning that life is throwing out using this body-mind instrument that has been conditioned by life a certain way, so that the only thing I can say in relation to this subject is what I do say. When a question is asked, the only answer I can give is the answer that I give, because it's part of the story of life, the creation that has been created to unfold from the beginning of time to the end of time exactly as it's been designed, exactly as it was created, like a story. So Ramesh beautifully used to say, the story has been written, acted, directed, and produced, and it's in the can. And we are watching the creation that has been created unfold. Whatever the humans do is part of the creation. So life is, as part of the story of cause and effect, life is throwing out new conditioning using an instrument. The new conditioning is being received by all the instruments that are exposed to it. The changes that are made are mechanical. How the new conditioning that is received, how it affects our up-to-date conditioning, not in our control. But what we do see is that changes happen. New thoughts start arising, new contemplations start arising, new insights start arising, and as a result, old beliefs start to fall away, and the attitude changes. All a magnificent happening according to God's will. There never has been a doer doing anything. Everything that happens is simply a cause followed by an effect. And even with a deep understanding of the nature of life being a spontaneous creation, which really means that even cause and effect is just contained within the experience. What that means is that the experience unfolds as if cause and effect is true. Ultimately, we can say even cause and effect is not the truth. Cause and effect is not really the reason why things happen. But the story has created spontaneously in each moment a story that unfolds as if cause and effect is true. So within the story, if the creator of the story is going to bring about a change, the creator of the story doesn't just bring about a spontaneous happening. If in the story an oak tree is going to exist in a park, the story is going to unfold such that at some point a seed of an oak tree is planted, either by a human or by a bird that drops a seed in the ground, or wind blowing it off the tree, whatever. The oak tree will appear at a particular point in time with an apparent history of cause and effect. So theoretically, consciousness could create an oak tree right now in front of us. In theory, there's no reason why, based on the spontaneous creation fundamental nature of life, that an oak tree couldn't appear right now in front of us, or an apple floats past. But it doesn't. And the reason it doesn't is that the story is designed to be a story of cause and effect. And so the creator writes the story such that things that are not explainable by cause and effect don't happen. At some point in the story, this might all change. At some point in the story writer, the creator, might say, let's make this a little interesting. Let's start making things spontaneously appear, and we'll have to get the humans to reassess their conclusion about what life is. So the conclusion that life is an objective reality will suddenly, in an instant, have to be completely reevaluated by all the scientists and everyone living on Earth. That reevaluation will be a result of things spontaneously happening, and even the reevaluation is part of the story. It would mean that that was the story that God has created. A story of creating the impression that life is something it isn't. A story of creating the impression that this is an objective reality and that the human is an objective, separate, independent entity. And then at some point, bursting the bubble. It doesn't seem to need to get oak trees to manifest in front of us for some bubbles to get burst prematurely, or not prematurely, but without that sort of thing happening. Life brings in spiritual teachings to effectively do the same job of getting us to reassess our belief systems. It brings in a spiritual teaching into someone's life, and the spiritual teaching says something like, you're not the doer. Everything is a happening. And then a reaction happens in the person listening to that. Either they say, what nonsense, and never engage in that teaching again. If that happens, it was destined for it to be like that. So the story of life brings in a teaching, and it also puts in place the reaction that moves the seeker or moves the person away from the teaching. Or it happens differently. Life puts in a seeker, life puts in a teaching that brings about a radical concept, different to what we believe, and the reaction inside might be, oh, this is interesting. It doesn't make any sense to me, but I want to explore it. Or, in the moment of hearing it, life can put in place a violently beautiful reaction of, wow, this is exactly what I've always thought. Whatever the reaction, the point is it's destined to happen that way, and it's the story of life unfolding. So even seeing life as a spontaneous creation doesn't prevent the story of life continuing to be a story of cause and effect. And so we can't become obsessed with just one side of the coin. This is what often happens in the awakening process, is that an awakening teaching is delivered to get us from being obsessed with one side of the paradox, like the side of the paradox that says everything is absolutely objectively real, and an awakening teaching says none of that is true. Cause and effect doesn't exist. Cause and effect is not real. And you are not the body, you are consciousness. And slowly we get to see the other side. But the teaching can insert, or the story of life can insert a relationship to the concepts put forward by the teaching, a relationship in such a way that it's believed to be truth. And so we go around saying, cause and effect doesn't exist. I am not the body, I am consciousness. And that too is not that balanced. So if we hold on to either side of the paradox, we are a little deluded. And so somewhere along the lines, life will bring in another teaching that says, hey, it's not one or the other, but it's one and the other. The two are not opposites, they're not contradictions. Life is a spontaneous creation. Life is a experience, but the content of the experience is a content of cause and effect. Just like the theory of creation versus evolution. Man has seen them as one or the other, and they fight over which one it is. It's both. Creation means a spontaneous creation, not based on the rules of cause and effect. So in the Bible, the story of creation is described as God having created the world in 7 days. So out of the window is the notion that things evolved slowly over time, and God did it all in 7 days. The mountains, the rivers worked really hard for 7 days, and there it was. So cause and effect is being knocked out of the picture. Evolution is being knocked out of the picture by that description. Scientists look at the evidence around and they go, what nonsense. It's very clear that things so they'll say, that's, if you believe that, you're just believing religious doctrine. So then we have this conflict of fighting, which is it, one or the other? Whereas actually when we look at it, why isn't it that life is a creation, and what has been created is a story of evolution? Much more beautiful than fighting over one or the other. And what it does is it reconciles two seemingly opposites and puts them together. So life is a creation that is a story of evolution. That's why all the evidence, when we look at the surface of life, the evidence is there that tell us there were dinosaurs X number of million years ago. Because the spontaneous creation in the moment is designed to unfold that way.
So before, if I understood it well, it is saying, you were saying that there always will be a sense of person, just not that this person is a doer, but that everything is happening spontaneously. But what if this goes even further, that there never ever was even a person, that even the whole idea of a person is just an idea?
Sure. So just so as not to confuse viewers, we were having a conversation earlier.
I went back into this, what you're saying 5 minutes earlier about the doership.
In satsang, you're talking about here?
Yeah, right now, just...
Yeah. And so, what I guess I said is that the belief in personal doership falls away. And your suggestion is, what if the process takes us beyond just the belief in personal doership, but dissolves the experience of duality? And what replaces it is an experience of oneness, where in that experience of oneness, the sense of being separate at all, on any level, is also dissolved. Now, so I can speak on this topic from very, very, very personal experience through a complete range of movement. That's why I like the question so much, because it's very clear that in certain paths of seeking, it is believed by seekers that enlightenment is a radical shift of experience, such that the experience becomes an experience of oneness, and that the person dissolves. That the experience is an impersonal experience after enlightenment. I say this because along the way I believed that without doubt. I was absolutely wrong, but for a period of time, I believed it. I believed it because my process put in front of me some of the most profound, beautiful, non-dual teachings that there are. And those teachings are there to do a job. They're there to break the identification with solely being the physical entity. A bit like that concept I mentioned at the beginning that says the flow of life you're not in control of, but your attitude you are. So it creates a mental separation of two things that were intertwined in such a way that didn't allow us to see them clearly. And so in the non-dual teachings, what is pointed at is the fundamental nature of life as oneness. And what is often said as one of the key tenets of those teachings is you are not the body. You are awareness in which everything arises. And it does that to create the capacity for this identification with the body and the obscuring of awareness, which subsequently happens when there's this identification with just the physical. It does that in order to create a loosening and then for awareness to land on itself, wake up to itself. And the teachings do that very well, and I think we can call that an awakening teaching to bring about an awakening of consciousness or awareness to itself. Self-realization, you could say. The self becoming aware of itself, the self realizing itself. Self-realization is different to liberation. So there is a great Hindu or saying in the scriptures, don't mistake understanding for realization. Don't mistake realization for liberation. And in that context, which is different to a lot of modern Neo-Advaita teachings, the word understanding in that context means an intellectual or a scholarly understanding. Whereas in other teachings, understanding and knowing with a capital U or capital K refer to something deeply known at no distance, so known absolutely, we could say. In this it says, don't mistake understanding, like scholarly knowledge or intellectual understanding, for realization. Don't mistake realization for liberation. What it's highlighting is there's a process where we start off with understanding the text intellectually, or understanding what the teaching is saying intellectually. If we get stuck there and we become just stuck there, we don't move on to realization. So we've all heard many very learned people spout off, quote of this and that, and so says this, and on page 456, verse 5, this. They're very well educated, but have no necessarily first-hand experience of what all the concepts are pointing at. If destiny takes us to the next point, there is a realization of self, for ourself, by itself, right? Which means not something that a doer does, but something that spontaneously happens because all of the preceding variables were such that at a particular moment, bang, seemingly out of nowhere, this awakening of self to itself happens. In that phase, there is this revelation of oneness. And that phase can include more than just one awakening, but many peak experiences, many satoris or awakening and experiences that are different. And some of them can be quite long-lasting. This middle phase is referred to, so I'll bring in another nice Zen saying. It says, before the process of enlightenment, mountains and rivers were real. During the process of enlightenment, mountains and rivers were seen as unreal. After enlightenment, mountains and rivers are real again. We're being told everywhere, once we start hearing it, once it's time for us to hear, there's a middle phase. There's realization, self-realization, but don't mistake that for liberation. Don't mistake the seeing everything as unreal for liberation, because then it says after enlightenment. Everything is related to as if it's real. We have to live life on the plane of reality, which means the experience no longer remains an experience where everything is seen as empty. That's very important for a period of time. Either empty or made of consciousness. That's the middle phase where we see it's not real. And then life takes us beyond that. So my relationship with Ramesh, when I went there, this middle phase was more or less finished, right? But it didn't finish except after meeting Ramesh, because as far as I was concerned, this wasn't a middle phase, this was nearly the end, because what was being experienced in that middle phase was an experience of oneness, where attention was no longer landing on the body aspect. That was now seen as, temporary and changing and therefore not real. So the teachings had basically worked so effectively at pointing out that, that which changes, that which can be observed by awareness, is not real. It worked so well that the experience had actually changed, such that the previously unrecognized awareness became what was predominantly recognized by itself, and the other objects were like, they're not really important.
But here this would still be a division, that on one side there is awareness of everything, and on the other side there is phenomena. But then now there is like those two came together, and there is really just oneness, but without somebody witnessing it. So it feels really like a bit dizzy. It's maybe this middle phase is happening to me occasionally, and it's very confusing because it's just everything is just like one soup, like a fish swimming in the water, realizing that now she's not a fish anymore, but she's the water now. Mm-hmm. And
so even when the duality falls away, that's the past the middle point of the middle phase. So at the beginning of the middle phase, there is still a separation of the, basically a separation of the objects and the awareness that is aware of them. And that to me is not really witnessing, that's more observing. But as we start seeing the errors that are keeping it as a witness and an object witnessed, as life brings about those changes, it can shift where the separation falls away and it becomes clear that what is doing the witnessing is not the object, but the very soup, if you want to use that word, the very substratum. Even, all of these words, substratum makes it sound separate. But what we come to see is that there is no separation in experience, that the awareness and the object are not two. And a lot more peace comes into our life when that's happening. But still, it's not what the experience ends up being in my experience. So when I went to see Ramesh, I had many of these experiences. And then after my first visit, I went back to Australia, and there was a very profound oneness experience where everything that had been written in a couple of teachings presented itself in this experience. Subject-object relationship fell away. It became very clear that what I was is formless and untouched by whatever happens within that space. I had the idea that previously that experience is where we see things separate, and reality is where this separation falls away. And in an instant, the experience of life changed so radically, so profoundly, to match all of these non-dual descriptions, that my brain had no option but to conclude, this is it. This is the end of separation. Because in that experience, the content of that experience, which at that time I wasn't able to call experience, I was saying, this isn't experience, this is reality. This is the falling away of experience. And I know that people who have had this happen will be hearing what I'm saying and going, yes, I know what you're saying. Because I don't think this is unique. I think the process of transformation follows a fairly common path. There's many different paths. This is one of them where there's this awakening to oneness. So I was saying, this is reality, this is enlightenment, this is from the experience itself, there was no separation. It was clear to me if someone came and chopped off my arms, the body's arms, they wouldn't even come close to touching what I was in essence. The experience was so profoundly different that it really felt that the body is just this thing, not me at all. Any identification with it had fallen away. So anyway, I went to Ramesh, sat down, waited for the satsang, and at some point I wanted to describe what had happened. So I described it really well at the time because I was really familiar with all the right words to use and which words not to use. And he said, Roger, don't worry about it, it's just an experience. And so I said, no, it's maybe I didn't describe it right. It's not an experience, this was reality, because this was the end of experience. The subject-object fell away, and I could feel that this is what I've been waiting for my whole life. There was peace, and after another 2 minutes of describing it, and Roger, don't worry about it, it was just an experience. So I thought, no, what's going on? He's not hearing me.
So it's a similar situation here, I think, because I also now there is this feeling that there is just always just one substance with no separate.
Yeah, but
it feels like a bit.
There's a difference.
If I told this to a doctor, they would say it's probably some kind of psychosis, because
sure.
It's so
yeah, but there's even different levels of the different experiences. So what you're experiencing and describing right now would be more like what I would call a witnessing. this experience I had, because I'm familiar with what you're saying, where we sit and feel like there's no, like that I can relate to.
No boundaries.
No boundaries and
no.
empty.
Also, his
and
body is like something here.
yeah.
Not taken seriously.
Sure. And things aren't at a distance, things aren't over there. I am what they are.
Everything.
Yes. This experience I'm talking about was 10 or hundreds of times more crisp, in a sense, when I compare the experience I had to the experience of feeling like I am everything. Because I had the more subtle experience that you're describing of not being able to locate myself and feeling like I am. This was much different. So I was convinced this is finally the complete oneness. Anyway, described it a third time. Ramesh said a third time, Roger, don't worry about it, it's just an experience. So my conclusion was, he doesn't know. He hasn't had this. Right? That's why he's saying this. And then I thought, actually, his whole teaching is very much about daily living, and it's in a way, I thought, very superficial, not very profound teaching. A bit like kindergarten spirituality, I thought. And this morning I mentioned one of the things I had an issue with that took me a while to click, which was the anger and blame being so closely intertwined that I couldn't understand that anger is a biological reaction and not psychological, not suffering, based on going to my experience. And in that situation, Ramesh used to insist time and time again, it's a biological reaction, and at some point, destiny allowed me to see, wow, he's right. And in the same vein, this was another of those things that I had so much trouble with. So I left Mumbai, that visit, with the idea, actually, I'm not sure that he really knows. I don't think he's had the experience that I've had. And then for about a month afterwards, I was walking, trying to find the same, or going through the same spot, waiting for it to happen again, because it happened on a morning walk one time. And after a month of this, I realized I'm actually waiting for something to happen. And I'm trying to make it happen. Or I'm waiting for something to happen. And I registered that this waiting is suffering. It's a form of uncomfortableness with the way things are. And when I looked at it, I saw the waiting is based on an idea that enlightenment is the experience that I had, and enlightenment will be the time when that experience comes back and it remains unchanged. It is always there. And in that moment I thought, what if he's right? What if it's just an experience? Don't worry about it. Because in me there was nothing that was entertaining the fact it was just an experience, don't worry about it. And so then I thought about it a bit more and I came to see experience. Why can't experience be an experience of oneness? Why can't experience be designed to feel one way or the other way? The normal, what we call normal experience of life, is the experience of duality, and this experience was the experience of oneness. They're both experiences, just designed to be different. The fundamental nature of experience is always non-dual. You can't not have a non-dual experience. Even the experience of separation ultimately is a non-dual experience at its core. This is saying that just like the painting that has many trees and birds, that appears in content to have many, ultimately, fundamentally, it's a single painting. And this is a single experience. It's just a single experience designed to appear as many. The oneness experience is an experience also, but with the content being very different. When I clicked on this, I thought, wow, I'm believing that this oneness was reality, and I was seeking truth. I was a seeker of truth, a seeker of reality, a seeker of the falling away of illusion. And I thought that when the experience changed from duality to non-duality, that was the falling away of illusion. That was the falling away of ignorance. It turns out that the words of the teaching, what you're really looking for, what are you really looking for? And I went and had to become honest again, drop all concepts and say, actually, I just want to be happy right now. If I was happy, I wouldn't be seeking this or that. And I noticed that this waiting was uncomfortableness, and as soon as this whole process unfolded, my belief that enlightenment looked like a oneness experience was seen as a belief, it fell away, and there was peace. So the expectation that it looked like something was actually causing, not the end of, it wasn't causing the oneness experience not to be there, but it was causing the peace not to be there. So then I said, who cares about whether it's a oneness experience or an experience of duality? As long as there's peace on a continuous, unbroken basis, I'll take it, thank you very much. And that's what happened when that belief fell away. There was one less obstacle obscuring my peace. And believe it or not, these peak experiences that had been happening for years started to fall away. And another conversation related to this topic was on a separate visit to Ramesh. We were having a conversation, and I was talking from the top-down, I am consciousness perspective, and Ramesh was listening. And at some point, he said to me, Roger, tell me, who's talking to who? And I said, well, this was on my first visit to Ramesh, and I didn't really know his teaching. I only went there because he was a translator of Nisargadatta, and I wanted a connection to Nisargadatta. So I was talking with him, and at some point, Roger, who's talking to who? And I said, well, you could say consciousness is speaking with consciousness, and consciousness is listening to consciousness, which in another context, Ramesh would have been very happy with, because all there is consciousness, one of the key concepts. Everything is a happening according to consciousness. In this case, Ramesh said, Roger, don't be ridiculous. Roger is speaking to Ramesh, and Ramesh is listening. Ramesh is speaking to Roger, and Roger is listening. And I thought to myself, it's taken me 4 years of being heavily involved, dedicated to teachings of non-duality from the top-down perspective, taken me 4 years to see that there is no Roger, that everything arises inside what I am as consciousness. And here he is trying to tell me that there is a Roger and there is a Ramesh. I thought, this guy is not for me. Right? And yet, when the conversation finished, I kept thinking about my answer and his question. And at some point, so I had to keep reconciling it. Like the only way I could reconcile that there's a Roger and a Ramesh is to say, well, everything is consciousness, and so what he's calling Roger is really just consciousness. So I said, really, there is no Roger, there's just consciousness. That's how I kept reconciling it. And at some point I realized I'm not even able to say, I am Roger. And that is Ramesh. That's what I realized. I can't say it. I can't accept that. And when I saw it, I saw, wow, I'm holding on to a belief. Because actually in practice, as well as feeling like everything is one, we still feel this strange paradox of being everything, but specifically being this body, sitting in a chair, speaking. That's the
through
experience.
this instrument, yes, because I cannot say what this other person is thinking or feeling, but I see that there is something arising here. But in the background there is this feeling of oneness. But maybe then I think that maybe this feeling of background oneness has to be integrated into the everyday life, so that there is always behind somehow also this recognition of oneness in the midst of everyday life.
Yeah, so it's the recognition of oneness and the recognition of individuality, simultaneous, such that one doesn't obscure the other. So we start off being completely identified with the body, unaware of anything different. Being identified with the body, we are basically outwardly focused only. The teachings come along and say, stop looking outward and turn inward. And we start to see this is possible. We get glimpses of this inward and just being. And then it happens more and more often. But if someone comes and talks to us, we can't hold both. So if something happens, our inward focus suddenly becomes outward focused. And we find that we're continually either outwardly focused or inwardly focused. And as we become more and more grounded into this resting in being, which is a result of becoming inwardly focused, at some point something magical happens where this simultaneous outward focus can happen, where thinking can happen, speaking can happen, working in daily life can happen, and the inward connection, the focus on what I am at my core doesn't get disturbed, but at the same time, I still function as if I am the body. And this is the paradox of the oneness and the individuality arising simultaneously. And so when people come to describe it, sometimes, they go, it's undescribable, it's a paradox. I agree, but I think we can put words on it. I think we can do a reasonably good job of describing it, such that someone who is experiencing this or close to experiencing it can use the description as a pointer to, oh yes, actually that's right. At what had happened for me, I was completely focused on just the formless awareness. And so Ramesh was basically saying, hey, come back down and examine your experience without the presence of this belief that says you are not the body. Drop that and see what you are really. And at that point I said, I have to be able to, on one level, say I am Roger. Because if I went around saying I am consciousness, I looked at it at some point and I go, well, this body, Roger is saying, I am consciousness. It's a bit like someone running around saying, I'm Elvis Presley, or I'm a dog. They might believe that.
So your job was then to integrate this experience, or I don't know if it was experience, back to your daily living. But it's interesting because there are also different teachers, so that is confusing. For example, then you have Tony Parsons who claims that there's nobody here, he says, but you say that there is somebody.
Don't believe.
So maybe it's just his idea of his concept.
It's not his idea, it's a concept. So the teaching, any teaching, even Tony Parsons' teaching, somewhere in it will say, don't believe anything. Know it for yourself. Right? And so the concept is doing a job. The concept is breaking our identification with an old way of seeing life. It doesn't mean that the concept is an accurate description of a balanced view of life. That might not be the job of the teaching. The job of the teaching is to bring about a certain result. And say to break something. And then, once it's done that, another teaching will come along and say, hey, let's just smooth off some of the edges that other teaching isn't very good at doing. It's very good at getting you to the point where now all you need is some smoothing off of the edges. So this isn't a comparison. This isn't saying, oh, this teaching is better than that teaching. It's actually saying all the teachings are just life putting a seeker through a conveyor belt of what's needed. And
just removing concepts, but they're not truth, right? Like you said in the beginning. Now I understand. I like that parable about the 10 bulls of Zen. I don't know if you know it. It's like it's 10 paintings of some Zen master. First there is somebody searching for the bull, and then he finds the bull, then he tames the bull, then he takes the bull back home, and then the 8th picture is just empty, just like there's nothing.
mm-hmm.
But then some other monk added 2 more pictures, and the last pictures is as he goes to the market with his workers, and he's coming back with the bottle of wine, like so now. So obviously this experience is now integrated into his everyday life.
Yeah. So, the seeing that the bull isn't there, that doesn't exist. You know, to me that would be the teacher that stopped there. Their teaching was a teaching to bring someone to see the emptiness of life. But that's the halfway point, let's say. That's the realization. And then another teacher says, yeah, that's all fantastic. I agree with all of that, but I've been taken through an integration point where I understand the nothing, but also when all of these concepts drop, I find, oh, Roger is here, and Roger has to live life as if time and space are real, as if cause and effect is real, as if I am the body, as if I am the doer. The experience still feels as if I am the doer, but deep down I understand that whatever happens through me is consciousness flowing through me. Whatever happens through me is not my doing. It couldn't have happened any other way. So that's to me it's beautiful. The last 2 are added on, which don't invalidate the realization of nothing. They just show it as a continuation of it, an integrating of the understanding into daily living. So that's the role that Ramesh played, is took the non-dual understanding that had been brought about by certain teachings, and then said, yes, we've got some more work to do, because some of those concepts from the non-dual teachings have been turned into beliefs, and they're preventing the integration from happening. And Ramana says, use this thorn to remove the thorn embedded in your thumb, but be sure to throw both thorns away. So the thorn embedded in your thumb is a belief. A thorn is a concept. Once it's embedded into your thumb, it basically means that it's not going anywhere. You believe it to be true. You don't question it. And if it's embedded in your thumb, it's a problem. It's going to be the niggler in your life. So Ramana says, use this thorn, which is a spiritual concept, to uproot the thorn that is embedded in your thumb, but then be sure to throw both thorns away. Now, he says that not because he thinks there's the possibility that you'll uproot one thorn and throw both away, but because he knows that that second thorn is also going to get embedded in your thumb. It's inevitable. It's just how life unfolds. And then this saying is basically reminding us to look and say, did the second thorn get embedded in my thumb? And I haven't realized it. And if it did, then you use a third thorn, which is the next spiritual concept that reminds us that maybe to take that one out, and then we can throw them all away. So the concept that uproots the embedded thorn, for example, could be, I am not the body, I am consciousness. Uproots the belief that's in the system that says, I am the body. So life gives us this thorn, you are not the body. And that thorn takes the first one out, but it gets put in place. It takes its place. So then we go around with the belief, I am consciousness, I am not the body. Cause and effect is not real. time and space is not real. Life is an illusion. And then some teaching comes along and says, hey, let's take that thorn out as well. It's not where it's meant to be. It's done its job. It's taken the first thorn out, but we'll take that one out, and now you're left with no concepts or no beliefs. So this is what modern spirituality, I think, is now about. Because the time when the classic non-dual teachings were introduced into life, that's happened. They are there from the modern teachers of that, Brahmana and Nisargadatta. Those teachings are there, they're in place. A seeker is bound to come across them, is bound to resonate with them. They're going to do their job. Now what's coming out in life is a new teaching that says, let's integrate. So your experience that you described to me before is there's this oneness that's there, but then the individual comes back and it creates an uncomfortable...
Painful. It's very painful then. When the individual comes back, it's very unpleasant then. So obviously then there are two different experiences, right?
But the painfulness is the beliefs in personal doership and attachment to outcome that the process hasn't yet uprooted. So it must have uprooted a lot of beliefs in order for what you're describing to be there. And then life says, hey, I'm not going to let you hang out there because there's more work to be done down here. And to the extent that we think that the work is to transcend into oneness again, we get stuck in this movement of escaping the feeling.
It's like an escape from life. It felt sometimes like this.
Exactly. At first it seems like this is the answer because the teachings that came before, that's what they were telling us to do, witness. Because that brings about the awakening. Now this is a new phase, so life starts pulling us back in, and we need to hear that there's another method that needs to start being applied. Witnessing, yes, but not only witnessing. If we're witnessing, what happens is we don't ever get to feel, because the last thing we want to do is feel these feelings. We think, I'm formless awareness and they need to dissolve. That's what has happened when I witness, is the feelings dissolve.
Then there is not even witnessing. Even witnessing gets, because witnessing is separation, because you witness something else. But here there is no witnessing, there is just life, which is like also...
Okay, let me just clarify. There's observing and witnessing. In the word witnessing, it depends on our definition. In witnessing, there is no witnesser.
Okay.
So witnessing is the absence of a witnesser. It's just that in the English language, all verbs are assumed to be done by a doer. So when we say witnessing, automatically we think there's a witnesser. But in witnessing, as I'm using it, the witness has fallen away. So there is no separation in witnessing. And there's peace in witnessing. To the extent that we think witnessing is the only solution, because it's taken us so far in the process, that's a bit of a problem. Because what ends up happening is we never get to see what is at the root of the feeling. And at the root of feelings, there are beliefs. Beliefs in doership and attachment to outcome. To the extent we just witness the feeling, what happens is it dissolves. But it only temporarily dissolves. It's just a matter of time for life to deliver pain, and the suffering arises and pulls us back out of witnessing. And the suffering is a sense of a me that has been attacked by the circumstance. And so if the root of the me, the root of the doer, isn't seen, it won't dissolve. And so then we'll end up experiencing something that maybe you're familiar with, this continuous need to escape suffering by becoming this formless awareness, and at some point it feels like an escape. It feels like this isn't quite right. It feels like there must be something missing here. Even when we feel like we are this everything, it becomes dry, and
Still there is the need to go back into the game, like I would put it.
But that's life pulling us back into the game, because that's where we're going to do the rest of the work. So feeling the uncomfortableness is really important. We don't want to feel uncomfortableness because it's uncomfortable, so our habit is to escape uncomfortableness. We eat, we drink, we have sex, whatever strategy we've come up with to escape feeling uncomfortable. And witnessing is a new escape. So don't get me wrong, witnessing is very, very important, and it's the foundation of what we are at our core. But if it becomes a technique that the doer starts to apply, then one, it's not real witnessing, and two, it gets tiring. It's something that I have to do all the time, and I keep getting dragged back into the game. Now I have to go back out, I get dragged back in, I go back out, and we get very frustrated. So to hear that feeling the uncomfortableness, expressing the very unenlightened emotions that are inside, is the next phase that will work in conjunction with witnessing, is very important. Because if we hear it, we go, I've never considered that feeling these feelings is a valid part of my process. So tell me more. Tell me more about why it's valid to feel these feelings. Because what I've been doing is reminding myself that I'm formless awareness, and as formless awareness, everything will just dissolve. But it keeps coming back. So until we feel it, until we find out what the story is at the bottom of the feeling of uncomfortableness, the story remains in place. The story is a story of a me that life has attacked, a me that the other has attacked, a me that isn't good enough. And for as long as that story remains in place, suffering will remain in place. So when we feel the feelings instead of dissolving the feelings, we go in, and a mildly uncomfortable feeling, which we're not really sure what it's made of, can become more and more defined, more and more felt. As it becomes more and more defined, more and more felt, it feels like more and more this feeling is going to kill me. So more and more we'll want to escape the feeling, unless we realize that no, escaping the feeling is effectively just suppressing it, just hiding what the story at the bottom of the feeling is. So at some point I'm going to allow the feeling to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then start putting words onto it. Words that I've learned might be at the base of my story, based on seeing my past relationship to things, whether we feel that we're a victim, or whether we feel that we're superior to the other, or whether we feel we're always being attacked, whatever it is. Whatever theme we see in our life, it's probably what is at the base of this feeling. So we start putting words on it. We say, okay, I'm feeling heavy and despair in life. Maybe despair, yeah, that's it. So when we say the word, the feeling suddenly gets a bit stronger, despair. And then we might say, why do I feel despair? And we might say, because whatever I do doesn't work out. Or I've been abandoned. And when we put the right word on it, it gets even stronger. And very soon it'll get to a point in intensity where we can just express it, where we can allow the words to come out. You know, I hate you for what you did to me. And not only the words come out, but a story in our head about a particular situation relating to a particular person comes out. I hate you for what you did to me. You left me. You left me alone. And I can't forgive you. And when the energy comes out, it comes out with such force. The emotion comes out with such force, because the belief, the story is an energetic load. Beliefs are energetic. They're contained in the body on an energetic level. And so when it comes out with so much force. And if we had a tape recorder recording this session that we might find ourselves going through, and then we play it back and we hear what it says. I hate you for what you did. You left me. I can't forgive you. It was so cruel. You broke my heart. Whatever. It's on the recorder. Now we know what the story is at the bottom of the feeling.
You are saying we do it with the person or alone? I didn't get it. It's like...
I've always done it alone. I don't think you need to be face to face with the person. I don't think most people in life will actually know how to contain this outburst.
So there is a skepsis here that we go back, like the fear that you don't get involved again in something, because once you have this experience, then it's and the question what to choose, the criteria of, and we're not choosing, but let's say we are, so because there's so many things in one face popping out, and it's really messy, such as stupidities, and so it's really sometimes it's confusing, what to just say, because there's many things you just have to say, come on. But maybe this is what you're saying, these bodily effects are more of criteria to maybe you can speak on this a little bit.
Yeah, so there's a phase, we don't know how, we can't choose whether witnessing is right, whether expressing is right, or whether saying, no, this is a story, I don't believe it. That's also valid. They're the three different ways that we can deal with these emotions when they come up. And it's not about us choosing which way to deal with it. It's just simply, once we open up to the fact that, really feeling a feeling and understanding what the story is at the bottom is valid. Because previous teachings make us maybe draw a conclusion, not that the teachings are wrong, but the conclusion we draw is that I can't feel guilt or blame. I'm formless awareness, and as soon as I feel that, I'm reinforcing the story, right? And so we don't feel. If there's a part of in our head, the working mind, that realizes that feeling is not being unenlightened, feeling these feelings of guilt and blame, it's part of the process of becoming enlightened, right? Of getting that belief system out of the body, getting that energy of doership and attachment out of the body. So once we become aware of this, then in any moment, I'm not saying how you should deal with it, but in one particular day, you might feel it, and you go, I can't go into this witnessing here, it's too much hard work. And you say, maybe today's the day when I just surrender into the feeling and feel it. And it can be, what a relief. I don't have to be the witness. I don't have to escape into witnessing. Okay, I'm just going to feel it. And the feeling then, if you surrender into it, you don't fight it, it can get stronger and stronger, and then you can start expressing it. At another time, and when you express it, effectively you understand the story, and you'll see all the blame, all the doership, all the attachment to outcome, meaning how we think that someone not loving us, and love is the deepest attachment we have to pleasure. Love is a form of pleasure, where we see that this person took their love away from us. We blamed them for it as they are the doer. We blamed ourselves as not being worthy, or we did something wrong. And we felt that this love was an attack. This love being withdrawn was an attack on who I am. So we'll see that in the story when it expresses. And if on a conscious level, our understanding has changed, where now we see life as a happening and not my doing, when this is expressed, we'll go, wow, look at that doership energy that was locked away when I was 5 years old, or when I was 10 years old. Or it might even come up as a experience that you don't even know in this lifetime, what would be described as a past life experience. And the same energy can be locked away in relation to any experience that happened that was tragic or painful. Not necessarily in this life, it seems, because there are these past memories of not this life coming up. And when we now see it with the understanding we have of life now, we allow it to come out as an energy that was locked away when we had a different understanding. And if it comes out with this new understanding present, it's released, it's transmuted. If we do this expressing and we don't have an understanding of non-doership in relation to the present moment, then we'll maybe contact these feelings of hatred or shame. They'll come up, and they'll be expressed, but instead of being released, the expressing actually reinforces the hatred and the blame. So I'm saying this in the context of an understanding of non-doership, just allowing the energies, which are energies that are there from the past, to come out. And as they come out, what we find is that the remaining doership, the remaining personal identity that causes a problem, comes out with them. And it's not necessarily about needing to express everything that has happened in the past. It's, in a way, an expressing that once again confirms the underlying issue in all suffering. It shows us from our own experience the doership and the attachment to outcome. It will add to our current understanding of how that is suffering, how that is a mistake. And at some point, the understanding cuts off all of these energies by simply undoing the ground on which they stand. Because if we had to go through and experience every event that has happened in the past that's painful, we'd spend our whole life doing that. So this process that I'm talking about of feeling and expressing is part of the understanding of non-doership and attachment getting deeper and deeper. And at some point, the whole load of guilt and blame falls away. And we find ourselves then living life as the human being, having no issue in saying, I am Roger. Understanding that what Roger is impersonal consciousness of Source, linked to a particular body, functioning through that body as personal consciousness, meaning Roger's experience of life, Nico's experience of life. And the personal consciousness experience, when the beliefs in doership have been dissolved, will no longer include suffering. And if the process isn't complete, suffering will arise and it will be witnessed. And it will be witnessed, or at other times we'll go in and feel it. They're two valid ways of dealing with the suffering when it arises. So you don't have to choose. Just be open and understand that there are these different ways that are valid. And then the movement of life will choose one way over the other for you. And you know, I don't have to control this process. If I've often said, if I had to control all of the steps that I went on, I would have messed it up in day 2, really. And this was a very seemingly complex journey with a whole lot of insights that popped in one after another. And if we have to control it, we'll mess it up. So we just sit back to the best of our ability and allow it to unfold. maybe, does anyone have anything they want to bring up? Any topics that someone wants spoken about, or any comments?
Yes, thank you for the clearing of these confusions.
Yeah, you're welcome. I would like to talk a little bit about past lives. It's a dicey subject. So, past lives, do they exist? In my experience, understanding that life is a spontaneous arising, that all there is now, our experience of life is only happening right now. Any memory of a past or expectation of a future is a thought object in the present moment that brings in the apparent past. So a thought arises, that a thought which we call memory arises, that tells us this is what happened in the past. And we're very good at believing what the experience tells us. You know, if someone comes up and says, gives you a story about what someone is thinking, or presents an argument from a certain perspective, like a documentary is a very good example of this. A documentary will have a certain spin on a situation. We watch the documentary and then we think we're experts on that subject. This is what happened. The documentary told me this is what happened. We're very good at hearing concepts and turning them into truths without realizing that there's maybe an opposite concept, a different concept. And when we see that there are two concepts, we say, well, maybe one of them isn't true. Maybe they're both not true. Maybe they're both true from a certain perspective. And so a memory arises, and we take the relative in life to be absolute. This is one of the big mistakes. We take that which is not real and treat it as real. We take that which is not absolute and treat it as absolute. A memory is not absolute. We all know that our memories are continually fading or changing. We add some things in, some details in, and then it appears like that's how it happened. You know, there's plenty of people that will tell you about, you remember that time we were on holiday and you said this, this and this, and we had this fun, and no, it was the other way. We were on holiday with John, not with Peter. What are you talking about? So we can see how our memory is not that absolute. Anyway, the present moment is designed to include these objects of thought that are inserted in the present moment, memory, to create the impression that there was a past. Maybe there was a past, but maybe there wasn't. Maybe this moment has spontaneously arisen, like a night dream spontaneously arises. And a night dream doesn't start off with the main character being just born and then go through a whole lot of phases. The night dream spontaneously arises, and the main character is, let's say, age 30. They didn't grow up, they just appeared in the dream. Now, in the night dream, the character aged 30 includes an object of memory. The character feels like they have a past, feels like they went to school somewhere when they were 10. The dream, which is an experience, is designed for this character that spontaneously arose in a dream that wasn't there a moment before. So the whole world spontaneously exploded in consciousness in the mind of the dreamer. The main character, age 30, spontaneously arose out of nothing with the dream world, and contained in the dream it has memories that tell a story of a past that really doesn't exist in this example. And the main character is convinced, oh, what do you mean? This is my friend that I went to school with when I was 10 years old. And both of them have just appeared previously not existing. So for all we know, we've just appeared right now with a memory that says we were in satsang this morning, a memory that we were in satsang last night, that we have, friends that we went to school with. Can we trust these objects? Can we treat them as absolute? Now, I'm not saying that they're not somewhat based on a past. Maybe there was a past, but we have to not treat it as absolutely as we tend to. Start seeing, it's an object that tells me something about the past. But when life unfolds and a person appears that looks like the person in our memory, life unfolds as if we had a past together. So if an old school friend appears, and in my memory, in that moment, there is a memory, this is my friend Peter who I went to school with. And then Peter, in the story of life, confirms that we went to school together. So a memory in the present moment, even though it may just be an object, life is designed to unfold as if that object is telling me of a time that really did exist. So Peter will confirm we were friends, and we'll have stories about when we were apparently young together. And a past life memory is like that. Is the past life memory arises in the present moment. We have a memory of, let's say, being a different gender. Let's say we have a memory of being a female, in my case, different to male, female, and this female was abandoned and was unable to look after herself and was killed by aggressive people. And in that experience of being killed by aggressive people, there was hatred for being abandoned, hatred towards the people that were attacking her. And so the whole experience, which was part of the flow of life, was interpreted with this attitude of doership. And that experience and the attitude of doership get locked away as an energy of doership. So in the present moment, there is a memory that comes up, and when it comes up and we can feel all this hatred, let's say, in it, we see that there's an energy inside this body that is not explainable based on this life. And so we have to say, well, where did it come from? Our conclusion is, it came from a past. Now, maybe the past doesn't exist. Maybe it does exist. Maybe there was this lady, let's call her Jane. Maybe there was a lady that experienced this tragedy. Maybe not. Fact is, it doesn't really matter whether it happened or it didn't. What is undeniable is that in the present moment there is a memory coming up with this energy contained in it. The memory doesn't mean it happened, it just means it's an object in the present moment. And when we feel these energies that appear to be energies that were locked away at some past time based on some past event, often it reveals to us why we engage in life a certain way. Maybe a way of engaging in life that we had no explanation for. And so a past life memory comes out, and we see that there is this abandonment by someone that she trusted, and a result of being abandoned was being attacked and killed by aggressive people. And we find ourselves in our life maybe acting in a way where we don't trust people that are close to us. We tend to have a feeling that we're going to be abandoned, And we're also very cautious of men, let's say, or people that can hurt us. And when this memory comes up and reveals the story at the bottom of this energy, it can explain, this is why I function this way in life. Something that maybe we didn't understand before. And this is all part of the illusion of life that is designed a certain way, following laws of apparent cause and effect. It's a story of cause and effect. If life puts in the past a certain experience, it means that life is then going to deliver a certain reaction to circumstances that remind us or trigger us in relation to that past experience. So even if something happened as a child in this life, the reaction to the circumstance will get locked away as an energy of doership, and then we'll find ourselves reacting to life when circumstance turns out in a similar way, following the same pattern. And we can call that our up-to-date conditioning, part of our up-to-date conditioning. So when life delivers certain traumatic events to a child, the attitude towards those events of doership get locked away and become part of our up-to-date conditioning. And there's no reason why we can't say up-to-date conditioning appears to include not only conditioning of this life, but conditioning of an apparent past life. And the job with these energies is for the root of the energy to be seen as false and fall away. And in this very same way that an energy from this life, from an event that happened in the past, in the apparent past, in the same way that that energy can be transmuted, released, by seeing the error of the belief system at the bottom of the energy that's locked away, same principle applies to an energy that exists in the body that seems to come from an apparent past life. If we settle on the fact that there is a past and there were lives in the past, when relating to these past lives, it's very important that we challenge the belief that there is a soul that moves forward. Challenge the belief that it was my past life. If I'm going to settle on an idea of a past life, I want to settle on the idea that it was a past life, a life of someone, Jane. And Roger has only had this life. Roger hasn't had many lives. Roger is a result of this body and consciousness functioning through this body. Roger is colored by the characteristics of this body. And the essence of Roger is impersonal consciousness of source that has no characteristics except for the function of awareness and the sense of being. And that impersonal consciousness, that consciousness with no characteristics, functions through this particular body as Roger. So Roger hasn't existed ever before in a past life, and Roger will never exist in a future life. Once the body is dissolved, that's the end of Rogerness. No capacity for Rogerness to be there when the body which creates all the characteristics is burnt or buried in the ground. The body is finished. It dissolves. So the vehicle that creates Roger is no longer there. The consciousness that functions through the body is unaffected by the body's death. The consciousness that functioned through Jane was the same consciousness that functions through everyone. Not just the same consciousness that functions through Roger, but the same consciousness that functions through Diana or Milosh. So it is the one consciousness linking to all of the bodies in life, and theoretically all of the bodies that existed in history. What seems to happen, so this is the concept here, is that when a body dies, the load of guilt and blame and pride, the load of unresolved fears, desires and unresolved talents, is how I'm putting it. That load seems to get stored on a cosmic cloud, or a karma cloud, we can call it. Now, what gets stored is not a soul or a person, it's just a bunch of energy, data we could say, about events that happened and the attitude to those events, the suffering, so the unresolved fears, the unresolved desires, and unresolved talents. So you can see this links to pride for talents, desires is attachment to outcome, and fears is the fear of what life can do to me and what the other can do to me and what I can do to myself by not acting a certain way. So this load that is contained in us until it dissolves, that load remains in place, and when the body dies, it seems like this load gets stored somewhere. This is an analogy, really. Maybe there's not somewhere it gets stored. And that data is not a soul, it's not a person, it's just information, it's just... And so another incarnation, another birth happens as part of destiny, as part of the story of life. And the load of energy can get inserted into this new birth as new conditioning, new up-to-date conditioning in the birth of the new person. Now, maybe that load doesn't get inserted in totality. Maybe the load from one person gets mixed with the load from another. It all goes into a big mixing pot, and the new birth gets a handful of a bit of John, a bit of Mary, a bit of Chris, all mixed up. And then the new birth gets a handful of unresolved fears, unresolved desires, and unresolved talents. Maybe that's why there's so many Mary Magdalens that, or whatever. But whether it's a whole load that goes from one person to another body that is linked to the previous life, and then to this, let's say, life that we're in, whether it comes from a chain of people or whether it's a bit of everything, and it just comes out of this cosmic pool and we get this bit of this and bit of that and everyone's going to get something different, is not so relevant. What's relevant is to see that as well as life delivering new up-to-date conditioning throughout the course of our life, we can have a load of up-to-date conditioning from other lives, not my other life. I've never lived before. This is it has to be very clear. So the load that we get is simply up-to-date conditioning from events that have happened. If we think that there is a transmigrating soul from one life to the other, which sounds very nice, humans like to hear things that are nice, things that we like, because it creates the idea that some I continues to exist. And some I that is learning and improving, and that the mission of life is to learn fully. And subtly there's this idea of doership. Me, the soul, is achieving enlightenment. And we need to cut all of these beliefs that maintain this separation and this doership. And instead we can see the human being is the one consciousness of source linked to a body functioning through the body. When the body dies, consciousness of source goes back to source, ready to go into another body. And the one consciousness of source is functioning through the 7 billion human instruments and through all of the previous 7 billion. And each human instrument is experiencing life based on the genes and up-to-date conditioning, which seems to include events from the past. For what it's worth, as long as you don't create the idea of a transmigrating soul, I would, based on the experiences that have presented, say that there is a series of lives, and in each life there is a specific dissolving of the beliefs that came from the previous life and were accumulated in this life. And so I feel that in my experience of life, I didn't have a large amount of suffering when I was young. Didn't have intense suffering, and when I started reading the non-dual books, as soon as I read them, it made sense. I didn't put them down for years because they were just reminding me, and the words were pointing at my experience, and it was becoming alive. So the fact I didn't come in with a big load suggests that the load in the past was being worked out. And I happen to have various memories, which I don't treat as absolute. I just see that life inserted various experiences, various memories. And one memory, for example, was a memory of a Buddhist monk who was in a monastery. He was one of the head monks. At this stage in the memory, he was 92 or 93. I could feel in the vision that he was tired. He had a lot of wisdom. He'd spent his life in the monastery as a guide to other monks. And at this point, at 92 or 93, he had this realization: life is not about being a monk. Life is about going through that stage of being a monk and then hanging up your monk robe and going out into life and living life as an ordinary human being with the realizations that come through the phase of seeking. So being a monk represented the phase of seeking and all the realizations. And so in this memory that I had, the monk was too old to do that. He was 92, 93, he was dying. He was peaceful, he was happy, but he had this realization: oh, if I do it again, if I'm reborn, not me as the monk, because I think he had a lot of insight, but basically he was saying, oh, it's not about stopping here as a monk, it's about going back out and living life fully. And so let's say that was a life that was lived. I didn't live that life. Roger, wasn't that monk. The monk had his own name, had his own personality, and there's nothing to do with Roger other than the fact that it appears to be that there's a link between Roger and that life, meaning that the load from that life, which wasn't a very big load because he would have worked out a lot of stuff, was then transferred into Roger when Roger was born. And as well as the unresolved fears, desires, and talents, I also include in there insights that happened. So I suspect that I'm reading these books and it's all making sense because a lot of insight happened in another life, not Roger's life. So someone else did all the work, working out all of the unresolved energies. And then it was Roger's destiny to be born with a certain makeup and certain destiny, certain load of unresolved energies, and through life those unresolved energies got added to, and then at some point it was destiny for those energies to be worked out, such that they were seen to be based on error, and then that energy works its way out, and there we have it. So for what it's worth, that's my view on where past lives fit into this story of life. Oh, sorry, I forgot.
Yeah, I was just had a thought about this. It's like that if you're looking like that whole universe is like a cause and effect, that also our body is a cause and effect. Mm-hmm. And because of that cause and effect in particular time in the moment which is born,
some of these things, which is destiny for the body, it's getting linked. And when this realization starting to happen, when this, like you said, error pulling it out, you become more empty of this, and there is not cause and effect for you because the realization switched, and there is just body which is living in the particular moment. Something like
Yeah. And it's so then we can look at it at both the energies that are contained in the body. We can look at it as being a result of the past, which is seeing it from cause and effect, or we can look at it as an energy arising in this moment, a memory arising in this that doesn't come from a past. It's just the two can exist simultaneously. And so karma is very much linked to this topic. Is there karma? Karma, in its simple, what it's pointing at is cause and effect. And so I say there is karma, but it's not a personal karma. It means the story of life puts a certain action in place to happen through a person, and that means if someone does something that hurts another, that action was part of the story of life. There really is no one to hurt the other. There is a character that is destined to do something, to deliver the destiny to the other person. That doesn't mean that because there's no one there, that there won't be a consequence. Life is a story of cause and effect. So there is a cause, and then there's a consequence. And so we'll never understand the cosmic law. We'll never understand the total complexities of the cosmic law. Maybe one of the cosmic laws is a law of karma. But the important thing is to realize that the cosmic law is not a cosmic law of personal karma. So if the cosmic law is this person did something to hurt the other, even though it was a result of destiny, it still means that the consequence has to be there as a consequence of destiny. So the story of life is, okay, you stole $100, which was part of the story of life, so it's not personal. Right? There isn't a God that says you have done a bad thing. God has become the bad thing. God has become the stealing of $100 as part of the story of life. And then God becomes the consequence to that. And so the consequence that we're talking about here is not necessarily the consequence of going to prison for stealing maybe more than $100, right? But the consequence of going to prison, well, that could be karma. We could say that's karma, but it's very clearly related. The law of karma might be much more complex than that. We might find that the story is someone stealing, and then 10 years later, something happening to balance out the ledger. But it doesn't mean that God is punishing an individual that did something wrong. It's simply that the story of life has a very complex cosmic law, and that cosmic law could involve this notion of karma. But it's not my karma. The sage realizes that, so we hear in Advaita, that the sage at the point of enlightenment has no more karma. What that means is that the realization is that there is no one to have karma. That's what the sage realizes. The body still has its karma. So the body of the sage will still go through whatever unfortunate circumstances are destined to happen. And the sage remains unattached to what is happening, saying, actually, fundamentally, that is not what I am. So knowing that what he is in essence is not the body can carry on having its karma, and the sage says, I have no karma. The karma of the body is not my karma. Because the belief in personal doership, the belief that I did something wrong and therefore this is happening to me as the doer has fallen away. But the body will still experience whatever is destined to unfold, sometimes pain. And why that pain is there, we don't know, but we could say it's destined, and we could say that it's destined because of following the complex laws of the universe, and one of those complex laws of the universe is karma, which is really just a law of cause and effect. So to try and understand that cosmic complex law of karma is not so important, but we don't need to dismiss it. The important part, the very important part, is there is no personal karma, there is no punishment for an individual for what they have done wrong. There is no reward for an individual that the individual has earned or deserved. But I have noticed in my life at some point, and I don't take it as truth, that when I functioned in a certain way based on the attachment to outcomes, and I did something in order to get something that maybe wasn't as moral as it could be, let's say. You know, you see some money and you take it because you think you need that. At some point I started to see consequences that life delivered in such a way that included a conclusion that if I take $50, life is going to take away $500 at some point. Now, don't believe this to be true, because I understand that I relate to my conclusion not as absolutely true, but just this is what life put in place, and these are the conclusions that are not held absolutely that also come in place. My up-to-date conditioning based on the observation of life for myself is it's not worth taking $100 to gain 100, because I suspect that the very complex laws of karma will balance it out, and I might lose $1,000 or whatever the balance is. If, however, I find myself doing something that in hindsight I look at as being immoral, then I say, that was destined to happen. And I don't fear the karma that might come. If there is karma, I was destined to do whatever act I did, and I'm destined to get the consequence. In both circumstances, that was pleasure or pain, and so the karma in the future is going to be pain.
Thank you.
To the extent that we believe certain teachings, like teachings of karma and teachings of reincarnation. So Buddhism, for example, at its core includes this theory of karma and reincarnation. We sometimes miss something really interesting, and that is that the very teachings that include karma and reincarnation at their core, remember, all teachings are a concept, there to undo something. At the end of those teachings, enlightenment of a seeker that follows those paths. Take the wheel of karma as an example. The wheel of karma represents the notion of birth and rebirth, meaning past lives and the being reborn into a new life. The soul transmigrating and being born into a new life according to its karma. The realization at the end of that process of birth and rebirth, the realization of those teachings that include karma as the core and reincarnation at the core, is the realization, so how we step off the wheel of birth and rebirth in those teachings, is to realize that there is no one to have had a past life, there is no one to be reborn, there is no one to have any personal karma. That is, when we look at these teachings of birth and rebirth and karma that tell us all the way through there is karma, there is rebirth. The final realization in those particular teachings, the way that we step off in those teachings, the wheel of samsara, the circle of birth and rebirth according to karma, is the realization, there is no one to have ever been born or reborn. So it comes back to the bull thing. At some point, there's nothing, which is the realization that all the previous pictures of rebirths and karma are not absolutely true. They come to a point where they bring us to the realization, there is no one to be reborn.
Can I add something?
Yes.
I just want to ask about these unresolved fears and about your story with the monk. So can we conclude that if we do therapy or something else and we resolve all the fears and all the talents and all these things, then this is the doer speaking, that then something will speed up the this situation and we can probably go to liberation quicker?
Yes, this is a doer speaking.
Yeah, I know, but this story with the monk, this is the conclusion the mind comes to. Like, if I do things, then everything will be resolved, and then I don't have to be reborn, and so liberation will come sooner. I mean, maybe people like Ramana who got liberation at the age of 13, and then someone may conclude that in his previous lives, he worked things out, so he didn't have to work things in this life.
So don't worry, you want happiness in this life, not happiness in another life. So what's the point of you working hard in this life for some other person to have happiness, right? So you want happiness for yourself in this life, right? How does that happen? It happens when we realize, which is not something that we do, but something that happens as a result of things that come before. We realize that life is a happening. Life is a happening according to God's will, that everything that happens through me is not my doing, that what I am at my core is consciousness. Right? So these are words that I'm putting on, but the fact that you're exposed to these teachings, right? Is life doing the work? Really, you can relax. You're off duty. You just turn up if you feel like it. And if you're turning up, it means life is throwing this stuff at you, right? And it's going to have its effect. It has a bigger effect when you don't try to make it have an effect. And when you just relax and say, here I am. And if you don't feel like coming here and you feel like going for a walk, go for a walk, because you never know what might land on your head while you're walking. You might see something that brings about a shift of perception because of everything that came before and what you're doing in that moment. So really, this relaxation and into not feeling like I have to do anything in particular, understanding that life will do its work as it is going to do it, and life works in mysterious ways. The doer doesn't understand this. The doer says, I need to make something happen, otherwise nothing's going to happen. The mysterious way is that life is a happening, and it's the belief in doership that is our suffering. And as soon as the movements of the mind, right, which is what was happening when you were asking the question, as soon as those movements get seen for what they are, then they won't necessarily stop straight away, but you'll take them less seriously. And go, there it is again. Let it be there, Or a thought comes up which is not your doing. This is the wrong direction. Relax, nothing to do. Whew.